So to start with, on my left is Jeff Lynn, CEO, co-founder of Cedars. That is a crowdfunding online website. He's also chairman of the Coalition for a Digital Economy, or Coadec. To his left is Anthony Williams, who's co-founder and president of the Center for Digital Entrepreneurship and Economic Performance, the DEEP Center, and co-author of Wikinomics. It's a bestseller, also of a number of Lisbon Council studies, and Taylor Reynolds, to my right, of the OECD, senior economist on the information economy. Let's begin with a couple of points. The SMEs create and drive most of the jobs in most economies, in the economies here in the European Union anyway, and they're driven by the internet engine. SMEs online grow twice as fast, export twice as much, employ twice as many people as non-digital firms. The internet contributed an average 21% to GDP growth of mature economies over the past 5 years. That's according to the McKinsey Global Institute. If we can harness the potential of the digital economy here in Europe, Europe's internet economy could outpace the US, India, and Japan by 2016 to 5.7% of the total economy if the policies are there to do it. This is according to the Boston Consulting Group report called the $4.2 trillion opportunity. But keeping in mind, too, that we've lost 5.6 million jobs. How are we going to get these jobs back? And we saw the minister mention that magic number of 2.6 jobs created for every job destroyed by the internet or eliminated by the internet. Jeff, quickly, what is to you the impact? Can you give a sort of a yin and yang, positive, negative, of this digital revolution on Europe's economy?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, Chris, I would just start with a very broad observation, which is to say that I believe that the digital revolution is the most important change in society that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution. It is not a sector. I mean, I appreciate the minister and many others use the ICT sector as a term of convenience, but fundamentally it drives through everything that we do, how we interact with other human beings, how we trade with other human beings, how we manage our health, how we govern, and a number of other things. It is fundamental to society and it's fundamental to business, and that's something that we need to recognize and appreciate at the forefront of any discussion. I think that when we look at how specifically it transforms an economy and it transforms jobs, there is one key point, and that is that it enables small businesses, lean businesses, agile businesses to do things that they could never do before, and it enables them in turn to create value in a way that they could never create before. And the great thing with a big business is that when you have scale, you can do lots of things by paying for them. But big businesses are clunky. They can't move quickly, they can't innovate rapidly, and as a result, their ability to create value declines over time. The great thing about small businesses is, well, the bad thing about small businesses is they often have very little in the way of resource behind them, but what they do have behind them is an ability to move quickly, respond to the times, respond to competitors anywhere in the world. Digital technology has leveled the playing field so that small businesses are now able to create value in a way that they never could before. And the critical bit about how Europe can win, which I think it can in terms of digital innovation overall, and how it can create those 2.6 jobs for every job lost, is around allowing and facilitating small businesses to harness the inherent power that they do have to be agile, to be quick, to be lean, and to create value through digital innovation.
Okay. How do we do that, Anthony? We discussed about micro multinationals revolutionizing work. Jeff is talking about the potential of SMEs. Why don't we see that now?
Well, the issue, Chris, is that I concur completely with Jeff that there's an enormous opportunity here. The fact is that only about 4 to 6% of these small and medium-sized enterprises are actually high-growth firms. It's a tiny percentage in the overall pool of companies. So part of what we need to do is to convince more entrepreneurs to take on the challenge of growing, what you find is when you do some of the surveys is that a lot of people are kind of comfortable with their small business and don't necessarily have the appetite to grow. So part of it, we need to try and change that mentality and encourage more people to seek out opportunities to use the internet and take advantage of the global economy to grow like never before. The second part is that they're not necessarily adopting technology, and there's a huge gap there. The companies that are high growth, they're innovation intensive. They innovate constantly. They're export oriented. They have a global, essentially, mandate from day one. When they start the company, the ambition is not just to serve a local niche, it's to serve the whole global marketplace. And that's their worldview, and that's the way they approach
So it's a matter of changing
strategy.
the mindset. It's a matter of
It's
encouraging,
part, but there's other things we can do too. We can make sure that we don't put excessive regulatory barriers in place. We can provide incentives for the adoption of technology. That might mean tax credits, for instance. It could mean changing small business development programs. I mean, I think that when you look at the kind of training facilities that are available, they're usually not up to speed on what the latest, greatest technologies are and how entrepreneurs can take advantage of them. So there's stuff that we can do there. Those are a couple of suggestions to get us started.
Okay, good. Taylor, what about this massive shift that we've talked about together, this massive shift in jobs? You've studied this. Why are we seeing this massive shift without the creation of more jobs?
Yeah, this is one of the questions I get asked the most at the OECD is what is the relationship here with the internet and the impact on jobs? So this is an area of extreme interest to economists around the world. I am from the OECD, so I have to start off with some numbers. And I want to tell you that this,
Not too many.
Not too many. But
There are lies, damn lies, and statistics, as one man said.
What we're seeing here is not without precedent. If you go back to the 1930s in the United States and you ask how many farmers did it take to produce enough food to feed 90% of the population, the number was 6 million. There were 6 million farmers that worked to create 90% of the food for the United States. 80 years later, in 2010, where would you guess that number is? It's 350,000. So we've gone from 6 million down to 350,000 in the space of 80 years. That's a 15-to-1 ratio. So those jobs in agriculture went away because there was a massive transformation with technology coming in and changing the way that we produce food. But we wouldn't look back and say that's a bad thing. That's actually been good for prosperity in the country because what it did is it freed up labor, people who were working on farms, moved to the cities, and they got jobs in manufacturing, and they started this manufacturing boom that lasted through the period in the United States. I think that we are on the cusp of a similar type of transformation right now in terms of the internet. It is changing the way that businesses across the economy function. So what we need to do is we need to do this in a smart way. We see it's coming, and so I think in terms of policy, what we should be focusing on are the barriers that they've talked about as well, that my fellow panelists have discussed. How do you get entrepreneurs and SMEs out there creating the businesses that will take in these people who are displaced by the internet? I break these down into two quick areas. One is the old economy, and one is the new economy. On the old economy side, these are issues we've seen for a long time. Bankruptcy laws, it's very difficult for a company to fail here. These things need to change, things like flexible labor laws, high costs for customs regulation if you're a small business. But then there's also new challenges in the new economy where we need better skills. We need people who are engineers, we need people who can write code, and something I mentioned earlier today, I think every person in the economy should have the skills to sell something online. You should have the type of skill that you could put something on the internet and sell it because that is a skill for our current generation that everyone needs to have.
Okay.
Can I build on,
Sure,
on
go
what
ahead, Tim.
Taylor is saying here? I think, too, there's a tendency sometimes when we talk about high-growth SMEs to say, well, we're just talking about tech startups and the next Facebook or the next Google. But in fact, that's not the case. The big opportunity is, yes, sure, there's opportunity there, but even bigger is to take all of the other industries, manufacturing, fashion, agriculture, biomedicine, nanotechnology. And
as the minister said, going beyond the ICT sector.
Precisely, right? Because that is where there are huge untapped opportunities for productivity improvements, for new innovation. You just look at the future of manufacturing. Maybe this is a topic we'll get to in more detail in a minute, but look at 3D printing. This is going to completely change manufacturing as we know it. It may not change things like how we manufacture toothpaste, because I don't need customized toothpaste from a 3D printer, but it could change so many other manufactured goods. And these are the sort of things we need to pay attention to.
Jeff, let's talk about crowdfunding. I mean, because you have a company that does that, but isn't that without being too self-promotional, isn't that an important part of the equation in terms of getting the money to do this, not just as an ICT firm, but anybody?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I won't be self-promotional, I promise, but just to give a little bit of context on crowdfunding in general, for those of you who don't know it, it's a very, very broad term that basically refers to internet platforms like mine that allow people to post projects, ideas, or businesses, and then have other people come and allocate money to it. And at a very simple level, many of you will be familiar with a platform called Kickstarter, where it's effectively a donation-based thing, or you get a little bit of reward. What we do at Cedars is actual investment. People are buying shares in new businesses with a view to getting a return the same way a venture capitalist or angel or anybody else would. We obviously do think it's a vital bit of all of this. It's not everything, but one of the great challenges that small businesses face when they're getting off the ground, be they very high growth businesses or even lower growth businesses, is the first capital they need. You don't open a shop and start, or open a business and start generating profit on day one. Most businesses need capital up front to take their first steps. It can be very, very difficult to reach for a number of historical reasons that I won't bore you with. What platforms like ours are trying to do is free up that capital and free up the capital of individuals to be put where they think it makes the most sense. It's the efficient allocation of capital. It is about you saying, I like this business, I like this project, this is something I think can work, I can make a return off of it, it's something society should have, and my money goes there. And at its most successful manifestation, it winds up being a tremendous way to get businesses off the ground. But there's another point to it as well, and this gets to part of what we've all been talking about, is that, the key to growth is embracing failure. If you cannot fail, you cannot grow, because growth involves risk, and the only possible way that we can ever look to build great businesses, be they the Googles and Facebooks, or be they in any other sector, it's to understand that many businesses will fail.
Concretely, I think what you mean is that if you have one business that fails, it's going to be very tough to go back to a European bank and get financing. Right? You're blackballed for years.
You are, exactly. And one of the things a platform like ours is meant to do is first of all, it displaces the bank aspect of it, but it allows you, from an investor's perspective, to diversify. It doesn't make sense to invest in one startup. That's a terrible idea. If you have 20,000 euros, do not go and invest it in one business. But if you can invest it in 100 businesses at 200 euros a pop, that means that when 90% of them fail, which they will, that's fine, because the 10% that succeed can succeed so successfully that you produce a great overall return. And a big part of what crowdfunding is about and what we are about is saying that just because new businesses are high risk, just because there's a high failure rate, doesn't mean they can't be profitable. You just need to diversify, and we provide the tool to let you do that.
Let's try to get the audience involved. Is there anybody who has a question on these past points we talked, either crowdfunding or about job destruction, about the upheaval that we're seeing right now, and how we're addressing that, and who should address that? Please give your name first.
My name is Rory Smith. I work at the Commission in DG Connect, which deals with basically anything to do with technology.
Could you stand up? I think so we can get the camera on you, right? Oh, okay, yeah.
I was very interested by the point made that a lot of European businesses don't have the appetite for growth, i.e. they're not interested in growing. And I would be really interested in whether the panel had concrete ideas on how you change that kind of mindset, because I think a lot of, even if you come to the your attitudes towards risk question, it's not just about bankruptcy law, it's also about, I mean, I hesitate to say a sort of cultural stereotype, but it is also about a mindset shift. And I'd just be interested if you had specific things to add on that.
Okay. Who would like to go first? Jeff? All right.
Just a very quick comment on that. I think you're right. It does tie into the risk point. I'm going to say something very blunt and perhaps very controversial. We need to celebrate wealth accumulation. I mean, the way to get people thinking about building high-growth businesses is to celebrate the people who have done so and who have made a heck of a lot of money, and to have a system in place, tax system and otherwise, that doesn't penalize people for accumulating wealth. That is a critical bit of how we create ambition.
Okay.
You know, another important point here is that, yes, risk aversion, I agree, is part of the problem here. However, if you think about it, as I said, you know, right now Europe, maybe 4.5% of businesses are high growth. If we can convert just another couple percentage points, that turns into a huge boon for both growth and job creation. So we're not talking about trying to convert everyone out there. We're talking about another small percentage. And many of those people, I would bet, just simply haven't been empowered to do it. They don't have access to the technology. They're frustrated by the fragmentation in Europe's regulatory environment. They don't know how to easily ship, you know, goods across borders. Maybe they need tools for e-commerce. You know, there's so many things. It's getting a couple percentage points that would make a huge difference for Europe. And indeed, it's the same thing in Canada, my home country. We also are perceived as being more risk averse than the United States, and we struggle with a lot of the same issues. And we're thinking about all the same barriers and how we free up those additional people to create jobs and growth.
By the way, we got 2 Americans and a Canadian. The North Americans, and I'm half North American. So, but we are also transplants, some of us. We live here in Europe. We've been here in Europe for many years. So it's not like we're speaking from a high podium at this point. We live here. Taylor, what do you think?
I just want to point out, when I talk to people who are entrepreneurs across OECD countries, you know, when I meet people abroad, they're interested in succeeding, and I think they're interested in growing their firms. From my point of view, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to make it easier for people to create businesses, and we need to make it easier for them to succeed.
How do you do that?
I think there's a list of the old economy and new economy things we need to do. I mean, it is very difficult.
Top of the list, 2 things.
So a friend of mine started a company where he's selling for Amazon. So he uses Amazon Marketplace, where he sells goods across Europe via the UK. But when he sends something, if he wants to sell something in Italy, he was required to have a euro-denominated bank account somewhere. So even though this is based in the UK, he had to come over and set up a bank account in a euro-denominated country so that he could send goods via the UK to Italy. And these types of barriers exist all over, and I think we need to bring those down in order to create...
It's about creating a real single market.
Yeah, it's about creating a single market, but it's about making it easier for people to sell and grow their businesses and not make it too complicated. It's already complicated enough as it is, and the internet can help bring down some of these barriers too.
Anybody else in the audience with a question? Sir? Oh, we got 2. Mics? Okay, great. And please give your name. Rank.
Hi, Enrico Turin, Federation of European Publishers. 3 brief questions.
I missed your...
Enrico Turin, Federation of European Publishers.
Okay, yes.
So we heard about the power of democratization and enabling small and medium enterprises of the ICT technologies, new technologies. I'm wondering how you match this with what's an apparent trend of concentration in the ICT sector. Because despite all the democratization, if you think of, for example, search engines, you basically think of one. If you think of online retailers, you think of one. If you think of social networks, you think of one. There might be others. But all in all, in all the sectors, you think of one. So how do you match that with the enabling and democratization? Then, in terms of job creation, destruction and creation, what sorts of jobs are being created? Is there some insight in that? Are we going to a situation of an extreme tertiarization of the economy? Is there a limit? Are we going to abandon completely the real, let's say, economy or the old economy? Isn't there still a need to preserve some part of that? And more specifically, to conclude, since I come from the creative sector, Are we thinking, for example, of substituting writers, journalists, publishers, actors, directors somehow with ICT? Thanks.
Some disturbing points. What do you think?
Well, three questions there. Let me do the first and the third one if I can. Yeah, and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. So the first one, there are no, yes, it's true. Okay, we have Google as a prominent search engine, Facebook as a prominent social network, and Amazon as a prominent e-commerce retailer, but there is lots of competition out there, and none of these companies are monopolies in any sense of the traditional word or term. Remember, Twitter didn't exist until like 6 years ago, and now it's one of the dominant channels for sharing information online. Things can change in a heartbeat. It's true that these businesses acquire what we call network effects. You know, they become more useful as they grow, and that's why, you know, Facebook is a very popular network. But I don't think for a second that, you know, we couldn't see a massive migration from Facebook to some other platform. We saw that in the early days of social networking. A lot of people were on Friendster and other social networks, and they migrated to Facebook. And don't forget, there's Google Plus, and that, you know, and there's, you know, there are other networks that are popular in China, and in Brazil and other places. So there's lots of competition out there, and I don't think that we need to worry too much about that. And in any case, our disposition should always be, well, how do we be more innovative? How do we create the next business that can compete or even replace that? And that should be our modus operandi, our motivation. On the third point about, does technology replace creative people? I hope not. Because I'm a creative person, I'm an author, I make a living in part from publishing. And you know, I think it's wrong to assume that technology is replacing that. Humanity loves great storytelling. It loves creativity. We consume art in all kinds of new ways. I don't think that's going away either. You know, there's always going to be a hunger for great content out there, and there's going to be a role for creative people. Will it be distributed differently? Absolutely. Are we going to see it in new forms, you know, digital forms? Absolutely. And we can't assume that, you know, we should hold back that creativity for the convenience of a few publishers who have failed to adapt, quite frankly.
Anybody like to add anything?
I mean, just to pick up on that, I'll give a very blunt answer to your third question. Technology will never replace writers. It will absolutely replace publishers. You know, in the intermediary models that worked well in the past are dinosaurs, and they will be changed. The fundamental creators behind the content are going to continue to create great content and are going to continue to get compensated very well for it.
This is just a sector that moves extremely quickly. If you were to ask me 3 years ago, what is the company that I think of when I think business email, it will probably be a different company in 3 years if you ask me again. Because I think you're seeing massive shifts here. And one of the nice things is we're seeing the life cycle of these companies and these innovative companies is relatively small in some cases. So I did want to talk about this as well. Is technology destroying creative type jobs? What we're seeing is that within OECD countries, typically in this sector, the good jobs, the jobs of creative people, the design, is staying within OECD countries, and what gets outsourced is the manufacturing or the lower level skills. And so I think it's not fair to say that the technology is killing, it's just redistributing around the globe.
Okay, we had another question over here, gentlemen. And then there's somebody in back of him.
Larry Moffat with the European Young Innovators Forum. We hear a lot of concern expressed about unemployment, but not so much about underemployment. And so I'd like to dig into that statistic of 2.6 new jobs created for every job lost. What kind of jobs are they? We've just read some horrendous reports about working conditions in Amazon warehouses. That may be an extreme example, but if a young graduate who speaks 3 languages is working, you know, just at the help desk of an IT company, is that really the kind of career that they studied for and that we want to offer to our new generation? So I believe much more in what the gentleman from OECD said about teaching people to sell on the internet, and maybe not just sell, but to create a business, to develop an application, and to use their own creativity to create their own job. Thank you.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
I mean,
Go ahead.
just a couple quick observations, and I know Taylor's got a wealth of information to share with us also, but from my perspective, we are seeing some polarization in today's economy between what economists sometimes describe as the lovely jobs and the lousy jobs, and not as much in the middle as we used to see in the past. And I think that is a consequence of the disruption that we have seen in the rapid advancement of technology that has displaced certain jobs, and of course globalization as well, which has allowed, as Taylor pointed out, jobs to be kind of shifted around the world. I hope that that's a temporary phase that we're in currently, and that the current trends don't exacerbate. I think the only way that they will exacerbate is if we drop the ball on education and skills development and training. Right now, it's pretty clear we have a mismatch between, on the one hand, the jobs and opportunities that exist and the skills that are being fostered in the current economy. And we need to work harder to realign that, the need in industry and what's being produced by our education system. So that has to be a priority. And I agree wholeheartedly, too, with your point that we need to work, I think, from a much earlier age to foster a culture of entrepreneurship, but also the skills and abilities that one as a young person needs to be able to do that successfully. So I would wholeheartedly support more effort within the educational system to cultivate young entrepreneurs that can feel confident that that is a career choice that will be very successful for them.
How can we, I'd like to shift this a little bit toward internet or companies that are internet driven that would create meaningful jobs, because our next panel is about employment. So let's see if we can focus on the business side, on these SMEs, on whatever companies can become more digitally driven. How can you do that and create quality employment that way?
Well, if I can jump in and if I can give you an example. Here in Europe, we have a large problem with youth unemployment, and we need to find a way to get people out there in the workforce doing something. And there's quite a few interesting things that are popping up. For example, there's a site called TaskRabbit. And I don't know if you're familiar with TaskRabbit. What it allows you to do is actually say, hey, I have this skill, and I'm willing to do it for a certain amount of money. So if you're someone who knows how to draw very well, you can say, I will draw a picture of your family. I'll paint it for 40 euros, and you put it up online. And people come in and they say, yeah, I'm willing to pay you to do this. What it does is, these are not creating full-time jobs, but they're creating the types of jobs where people can go out and be flexible. And we see this, as, particularly in the OECD, is important in terms of the changing demographics. We have a very large aging population where people are going to want supplemental work. We also see it as a way that the youth can come in and have something to do while they're waiting or while they're in school. So I think on one hand, that's very good. And then I also think we need to change the formal education system in a way that we are training people to get jobs when they get out. I think education is something that moves relatively slowly. And I think we need to make sure that we're training people in a way that they can step out of school and they can take the jobs that are available and in demand right now.
Last weekend, I drove to an office supply store that I go to every once in a while. It's gone. It's gone. It's called the Office Depot. And I looked on the website and said we decided that the trend is away from bricks and mortar, and now we're online. And how many jobs were lost? And what is the quality of jobs now that they have? What about the Virgin Megastore that disappeared on the Champs-Élysées? Circuit City in the States. How are we shifting to an internet-based economy and creating companies that can replace that kind of business? Jeff?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you very, very simply. My own business, we have a fantastic, our whole development team, our programming team is based in Portugal, which is a country that has severe employment problems. And we will hire any developer who is at the standard that we need them to be at. I mean, somebody who is a truly talented Ruby on Rails developer who can innovate our platform for us has a job with us. There is no shortage of demand for us or for many other companies for people with the right skills. The problem is many of the people who worked at that Office Depot aren't top quality Ruby on Rails developers, and it's bridging that skills gap to take people with an old set of skills and making them relevant to the new ones that's so important. There'll never be a shortage of jobs for talented people. We just have to create the talent.
Yeah, Taylor?
Can I also jump in? I don't think we should underestimate the power of the internet either for helping match potential employers and potential employees. This is extremely important, and we don't want to underestimate this because people have a varying range of skills across the economy, and there are businesses that need very different types of skills. And I think we need to do our part as well to leverage this to put the right people in contact with the right jobs.
Okay, we have another question over here. This gentleman? I'm sorry, because I gave it to him first.
You had one over here.
Sorry. And then...
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sergey Koperdak. I'm an advisor on new technologies and social media to the Director General of Education and Culture. It's a brand new post which reflects the growing importance of technology and its impact on education. Please forgive the North American accent. I'm actually half Canadian, half Slovak.
North American here.
It seems like the five of us at least here are sharing similar accents. But in any case, my question is, the minister mentioned the opportunity regarding big data analytics. And this is a new area that we're starting to look at in the education sector. And I want to ask, since we have this esteemed panel here, what are your thoughts on the type of opportunities in the education training space with regards to big data and data mining?
Who wants to take that first?
There's a whole new category of professions called data scientists, essentially people who specialize in analyzing data, and that kind of opportunity is going to be open across a wide range of different industries, everything from medicine to retailing to government trying to optimize public service delivery. I mean, virtually every industry is going to become more data intensive and driven by the ability to analyze what's happening in the broader world and the economy in a more granular, more immediate fashion. The people who have the skills to interpret that data, but also to visualize and present it in an effective way are going to be in very high demand, and we need to train more of them.
I can say I had a resume out probably 15 years ago that talked about, I used to use SAS because I'm an economist, and I still get contacted about jobs doing data mining because someone who knows how to use the program, the software suite of SAS. And so I can testify that there is demand out for these types of people. Again, I think we need to start training people with the tools that are available.
Jeff?
Two quick points on big data. It's a huge field, obviously. One is the pace of innovation within data analytics is even faster and more remarkable than you see in much of the digital sector. And just to give one example, I was at a conference in Munich about a month ago. Max Levchin, who was one of the founders of PayPal, one of the great kind of thinkers around digital innovation, was giving a talk, and he was hypothesizing that someday there might be a program, an app on his phone where what he could do is have the phone on in his car. It would measure and analyze the way in which he drives. That would be fed into his car insurance company, and his rates would be set based on his actual driving behavior rather than his demographics. And this was a far-out thing. A week later, I got pitched by a startup from somebody I'd never heard of, who had no particular background, that it was building an app to do exactly that. I mean, the speed of this stuff is remarkable and tremendously exciting. But I also want to take a point to say this is data mining in particular is a fantastic area where policy and innovation have wound up coming head to head. Under traditional approaches to copyright, it is exceedingly difficult to mine data because if you buy a license to a particular article or group of articles that you have in digital form, in order to mine them in any effective way, you need to make an electronic copy of them for yourself. That's just part of the technology. Traditional copyright law prevents that from happening, and you have infringed the owner's copyright. A, that's preposterous. And B, it is a huge limitation to the ability of academics and commercial researchers to be able to effectively mine data effectively. So And so if we're serious about really harnessing big data, one of the first things we need to do is create a Europe-wide exemption for text and data mining from copyright law that applies to both non-commercial and commercial research.
Let me say one other thing very quickly about data too, is that right now we're mining the data on the web. But we're really just at the beginning, the cusp of a really profound data revolution, because we're not even talking yet about the billions and eventually trillions of connected sensors that will be in the environment, pulling data from virtually every inanimate object on Earth, and including our natural systems as well, giving us unprecedented information about natural systems and environmental performance, water quality, you name it. I mean, so when that stuff starts to really heat up, then we're talking about a true data revolution.
Please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Linda Corredo-Stenberg, Director DG Connect. I have two questions for you. First, the issue on embracing failure and the success of new companies. I think that's only part of the problem, because here in Europe, we do have quite a big number of successful companies, and some of them come from the country I know best, as we like to say, which is Sweden, but they sort of get sold off. And some of them leave Europe. So, and I don't think that it's only because the UK has the pound and a lot of the other countries have the euro, or for administrative reasons, because a lot of these things are being, ironed out as we speak. But there is something else also going on. Is there not enough of venture capital base or financing available, or what is really the problem here? I would like to have your view on that one. That's the first question. The second one is on the education, jobs, and the future gap between available people who will do the jobs and the jobs offered. Here we have looked at another issue as well in Connect, and that is that actually girls and women going into this sector is not going up. It's actually going down. So here, the difference is getting bigger, not smaller, and I think this is actually a serious issue. I don't want to be, disrespectful to the panel, but unfortunately you are a good example of how it often looks. Therefore this is actually an issue going forward, because we need to encourage more girls and women going into this sector. So I would like to pick your brains on that as well. Thank you.
Jeff, let's go to
Well,
you.
I'm just going to tackle the first question. The second one is one of the hardest issues out there. The first one I think is at least a little bit easier, and that is to say that I think that there has been a profound failure in the capital markets around technology-driven businesses. And it's not great anywhere, but it's been much worse in Europe. As companies grow, I think angel and venture capital, there's always rooms for improvement, part of what my business does, but that's okay. It's just that when companies get to a certain size, they get beyond the scope of niche venture capital firms. The ability to raise money through IPOs and through public markets and through larger private equity just falls apart in Europe for a number of reasons around lack of institutional research, lack of just available investors, lack of understanding of the providers of the underlying capital, pension funds and others about the asset class. One of the things we're having happen in London right now, the LSE has just in the last week announced the introduction of the high growth segment to the London Stock Exchange, which is going to help to address that to some degree. But there's a lot more to be done. A lot of it's very technical. I don't think that the introduction of things like the financial transactions tax to further sort of reduce capital markets activity will be helpful in any way, shape, or form. But it's not just about that. It is about creating an infrastructure in the capital markets. If you could do that, if a 500 million pound or euro business could feel that it could go to the capital markets here without having to sell itself off or having to go to NASDAQ, I think that you would address that problem very well.
I think there's something more, forgive me though, but I don't disagree with that, but I think there's something more to it as well. I've had this conversation with several incubators, And they say, look, you know, for a lot of young people who are starting these companies, they're looking for a relatively quick exit. And actually the goal is to get acquired by Google or some other large company rather than to actually grow their company to compete head to head with Google or other similar businesses. And I think that in part is driven by venture capital because venture capitalists are also looking for their payday and they don't want to be patient and wait, you know, the long, you know, 10 years it might take to scale up. One other point. And this is a lack of management capacity, quite frankly, because it's one thing to do a startup, it's a whole other thing to scale that business to a global enterprise with all kinds of layers of capability to be able to execute and market products internationally. And part of what is sometimes missing is that mentorship or that management capacity to be able to take the enterprise from that kind of early high growth phase to the next phase of, okay, now we're a true multinational company with global capabilities.
So where do you get that? Where do you get that management?
Well, it's a good question. Partly you've got to train and develop it. I mean, also I think you got to find some way perhaps to mentor some of these young innovators, you know, with people who have actually already done and been there and built big businesses in the past. When I talk to the incubators, they're trying to get executives from large Canadian companies in there to help, you know, teach these kids, you know, this is what it means to actually grow, you know, a business that can operate Canada-wide, North America-wide, and then eventually globally as well.
Jeff, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just, the quick response I want to make on the venture capitalist point is, and you know, there's a lot of room for disagreement. I mean, one of the things we see in working with VCs is almost the opposite. I mean, a lot of the venture capital model, the traditional venture capital model is because you know most businesses are going to fail, you need €1 billion business to return the fund. And so we see a lot of VCs actually almost try to accelerate some businesses too quickly because what they're trying to, they don't care about who fails, they want to get it as big as possible. So I'm not sure I see the problem lying in as much in venture capital. I do agree, though, about the need for commercialization and marketing expertise. That's vital, particularly as businesses grow.
Let me address your second question. As with all good things on the internet, I saw it last week, and I'm not quite sure where I saw it or what it was. But I think I watched a video from the company Hive, I think is the name, and they had a goal of having 50% of their developers be women. And so what they did is they had this camp, and I think it was a 15-minute video that I watched, this guy giving a presentation about how they're trying to achieve their goal of 50% of the programmers in their company are women. And so they did this camp, they had these women come in, and they found that the teams that were better balanced were the most productive teams anyway. So there is an incentive to get these teams working. We just need to find better ways to do it. But certainly that's a trend that we're looking into.
I think we have a question back in the rear there. Yes.
Hello, my name is Ivona Meritin. I'm an advisor on access to finance at European Association of Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Oh dear, that was long. So I have basically two questions. To Jeff, as far as I understand, you are managing the crowdfunding platform.
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us maybe a bit more how you're protecting investors and how you're protecting intellectual property rights of the entrepreneurs? This is one thing. And a question to Anthony. How many European micro multinationals have you seen or have you heard of? And sorry, I don't have a question for the moment. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start. Question was crowdfunding. How do we protect investors and how do we protect intellectual property? Both absolutely fantastic questions. On the investor side, this is the actual crux of the work that I and my team do and have done for the last 3 years. It actually gets very boring, you know, to talk about in detail at times, but this is the nucleus of our business. A platform like ours only works if investors actually achieve returns. If we get a lot of people funding startups, there's some great publicity this year, and then in 2 or 3 years' time or 5 years' time, if nobody actually gets any returns out of it, we've got a very serious problem. We've taken a number of approaches, but the overall approach has been to say, you know what, crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding like we do, it is not as novel as it sounds. It is traditional offering of securities. It is the offering of shares. It's financial services. And we take old concepts like reviewing and verifying what the businesses say about themselves to make sure that they're fair, clear, and not misleading before we post it. We then manage the shares on behalf of the underlying investors. Rather than just posting out share certificates to everybody who invests, we hold them in a structure. It's called a nominee. It's like a trust structure. We manage, we look out for their rights, and we ensure that businesses are actually doing what they said they would. Businesses still fail. There will be a lot of losses. We don't protect against that. But we put in place a number of the kinds of protections that stockbrokers, investment banks, and others have put in place for many, many years for investors because we think that that is absolutely vital to creating investor returns. I'm happy to go into as much more detail at another time if anybody wants. Intellectual property is a different one, and that's a very interesting issue because when you're an entrepreneur using a crowdfunding platform like ours, you're putting your idea out there. And no matter what you try to do, it's out there. It's on the internet. And here's what I tend to say. 97 to 98% of businesses, if you are worried about people stealing your idea, you've got a big problem because you're worrying about the wrong thing. Eric Ries in Lean Startup has a fantastic section where what he talks about, he says, go try to get people to steal your idea as an entrepreneur. Go right to the product heads at companies that you see as competitors with your idea and get them to try to take it up. It's not going to happen. The biggest problem you have as an entrepreneur, particularly at earliest stages, is getting anybody to notice you, not to have anybody steal your idea. And in particular, when you're not disclosing very, very detailed mechanical workings of a patentable technology, but what you're talking about is an idea, a market approach, who the team is that's bringing it. That information has no value from an intellectual property perspective, and it cannot be stolen. That's 97 to 98% of businesses. I always have to make the caveat that there are maybe 2 to 3% of businesses where what they are inherently working on is highly protectable intellectual property that don't use a platform like ours. If you really can't tell the world about it until you have other protections in place, we're not for you.
Anthony, micro multinationals, how many do you know?
Yeah, well, I couldn't give you an exact number. We've written about them in a couple of reports I've done with the Lisbon Council. Paul Hoffines, actually the president of the Lisbon Council, is here, and you could seek him out afterwards and maybe get access to those reports, or just go to the Lisbon Council website, where we've written about a number of different micro multinationals operating out of Europe, and I think you'll find them in virtually every sector. One of the challenges, of course, is that a lot of the young companies, some of the most promising, then decide at a certain point to relocate to the United States, in part because they see better infrastructure there to support them, in part because, with the 300 million people, that's a large, market with a common language and open borders, easy trade across the entire continent there. That's very attractive, of course, for a startup. But I do think that there's lots of innovation happening here in Europe, and you'll see it across virtually every industry in every country. And we've documented some, and there's more work to do to document more of what's happening.
Okay, Taylor, we talked about junkyard gone global, this concept, very interesting.
I was just hearing this.
And that seems to segue right from this.
Counting the number of micro multinationals, I've been using an example of a junkyard that I found in the south of France. And junkyards were typically a very localized business because you would have to go either drive from junkyard to junkyard to junkyard to ask which part they had, or you had to call them on the phone. So it used to be a very localized business, but I found this junkyard, a very small junkyard in the south of France, that has its website available in 5 or 6 different languages, including Russian, German, English, French, and Polish. There were some others. And what they do is they actually sell parts online across all of Europe. And when you think about this is an extreme transformation of what used to be a very localized business to now something that can be multinational, and the companies actually benefit from it. So I think what we're trying to do is push for more of these types of firms. We want firms to extend across borders, but we need to do some things on the government and regulatory side to make that easier.
Okay. Any other questions? We're in our last 2 minutes. We're running down. Please, go ahead, briefly. Oh, we have 2 questions. Can we go overtime? I guess not, right? No. Okay. All right.
Thank you. My name is Yumi. I came from South Korea. Okay, so I'm working for Korea Communications Commission, which is in charge of ICT regulation and policy. So it is very honor and pleasure for me to be here. Okay, my commission's name will be changed in the Ministry of Future. That means, our government thinks the ICT will be the new engine for the future development, sustainable development. Actually, we have a new president this month. So our new president appointed the chief strategy officer of Alcatel-Lucent. Okay. Surely he's a Korean. So we think that we need the global competitiveness person who is in charge of ICT in Korea. So that means our government thinks the ICT area is really, really important and essential for the growth and development in the future. So let me tell you one interesting story about the Psy. I think the most of you guys heard about the Gangnam Style song by Psy. So, I would like to cite one interesting interview by Psy. He told me, the successful factor for him is he didn't do anything. He just put his song in the YouTube, which is the most, the biggest data sharing system. So he just put his song in the YouTube, and then 3 months later, he became a world star. So the internet can bring a lot of the more opportunities that we never dreamed before.
That's
so
a good story. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I'm so sorry. But thanks very much. And one quick answer, please.
Hey, I wasn't 100% sure what the question is. I mean, I guess what's interesting about Psy is that's a phenomenal role model for other Koreans and people around the world to say, look, this is what's possible. If a little bit of combination of something unique, something creative, maybe a little bit of luck involved too. But ideally, hopefully, lots of young Koreans will look at that and say, wow, the web is such a powerful platform. We've got to harness this, to change the way that we view our careers, the way we do business, and so forth.
Okay. Let's give a big hand to our three panelists, Taylor Reynolds, Anthony Williams, and Jeff Lynn. I think it's been a really good discussion this last hour.